Thank you. So one of the first questions we wanted to ask you about was what you think are the biggest challenges facing procurement today?
Okay, so there's a few of them. One of them is definitely analytics and basically systems capability because the processes inside procurement are still highly people dependent. The vast majority of the time, we still don't know someone's going to buy something until they tell us that they're going to buy something, and that's far too late in the cycle. And so if you start looking at artificial intelligence and start looking at robotics and some of these capabilities that are coming and predictive analytics and things like that, and then if you look at how the expenditures are laid out inside most companies, you usually have less than 1% of the suppliers getting 99% of the expenditures. Yet it's those other 99% of the suppliers that take almost all the time. And so there has to be a better way to manage that. I think that's one of the challenges. I think the second one is, and that requires systems capability. There's really no other way to get around it other than much, much more intelligent, capable, predictive, and also autonomic systems where the systems can help solve problems for you. So then the second thing I think is really related to how procurement itself operates. And procurement is trying to achieve its savings. No matter what we say, no matter what executives say, no matter what procurement says, at the end of the day, the reviews are largely being written on how much cost savings they're producing. And that hasn't changed in many, many decades. And then the problem is procurement is largely trying to achieve those savings at the table in negotiations with suppliers, and which also hasn't changed in many decades. And so it becomes parasitic. It's achieving savings at the expense of supplier profitability. It's not a sustainable model, and it's not where the money is. The money is in analyzing product and service design, getting early engagement with the business units, and driving strategies for standardization, reuse, simplification, and innovation to completely slash and streamline product cost, service cost, while still having it focused on the desired performance outcomes. And that, on average, I've seen about 18% cost savings is there. And that's before negotiating with suppliers. The other side of that coin is supply chain cost savings. There's all sorts of costs in the supply chain that should never be there to begin with, or that could be streamlined or minimized or simplified or eliminated. Those two things are where the money is. And we should still negotiate with suppliers, but this concept of achieving all your savings by sitting around the table with the supplier and hammering them to accept less profitability so you can report more savings, that's a big problem. I think the third big challenge is how we're positioned inside of the company, and we're positioned as a cost center instead of as a profit center. And this has significant implications because as a consequence, we're not resourced effectively. We're not, training. Sales spends up to 20% of their time in training, whereas procurement, who's negotiating with sales, spends only up to 2% of their time in training. And sales has better systems, tools, data, more resources, more money. They have more everything than us. And the reason is that they're viewed as rainmakers. They're viewed as revenue centers. We should be viewed as a profit center instead of as a cost center. And that has tremendous implications. And all you need to know is procurement doesn't report to the C-suite. It always reports someplace strange. It reports to accounting or finance or legal or manufacturing or operations, or I've even seen HR. And I've spent 30 years thinking about this problem, and I finally come to the conclusion one simple solution would take us a long way. Today, we report up to the C-suite, oh, we saved you $38.6 million last year. And then the C-suite, the CFO, the CEO, and COO get extremely excited. They say, great, we could use that money right now. Where is it? And they say, oh, well, you see, we gave that money back to the business unit and they spent it and bought other things. And so procurement savings today are just monopoly money, and executives don't understand it. And so as a consequence, they tuck procurement, they view it as a cost center. Every time they hear about procurement, it means something is wrong. Just like every time they hear about payroll, it means something is wrong. It's never good. And
If you
so,
don't mind following up on your point about it being a cost center versus a profit center,
yes.
how could you explain that a bit more? What does it mean if procurement is being seen as a cost center versus a profit center? And why do we want it to be seen as a profit center? What's the incentive for procurement to almost rebrand itself as that to the C-suite?
Okay, so let me finish the last thought very quickly because I need to close that loop. The solution I came to after 30 years of thinking about this is that when there's somehow a system needs to be created, that when there's cost savings that is achieved as a consequence of a negotiation, the money, instead of going back to the business unit, needs to go to the CFO. And if then it would cease to be monopoly money and it would start to become real money. And so that would take us some direction towards being viewed and treated as a profit center. Because in the case, so take this into consideration. In order, let's say a company brings in $100 million a year in revenue and they have a 10% profit margin. In order for sales to generate $1,000 in profit, they have to sell $10,000. But in order for procurement to generate $10,000 in profit, they just have to save $10,000. The ratio is 1 to 1. This money is going back to the business units today, and the business units don't hold on to it. They spend it to buy more stuff. And I think this is the source of the problem. If we could figure out a way, it's not enough to say we want to sit at the C-suite, we want to report to the C-suite. There has to be a demonstration of value. And so the way to demonstrate the value, I think, is a few things in order to be recognized as a profit center. One is the money that's saved has to go back to the CFO. Then you're actually making contributions to EBIT, to earnings before interest and taxes. The second thing is procurement has to position themselves as a source of enterprise advantage. And I think the best way to do that, today we try to engage early with the business units in order to put together better bid packages, to be able to better understand who's out there selling. We need to instead use that time and use that opportunity to really deep dive into the business unit's objectives and then collaboratively drive strategies for performance results, because today we're driving strategies to buy goods and services, which is wrong. We should be driving strategies to buy performance results. All the friction that happens today between business units and procurement is because the business unit asks for goods and services, we buy goods and services, and then they get upset because they didn't get performance results. Well, they never asked for performance results. So procurement needs to engage very early in the business unit design process, and then they need to have a singular focus on performance results. Then the business units will see that procurement is no longer a roadblock, they're an enabler. They're helping us achieve our objectives. And whereas today, every time the business unit tells the C-suite about procurement, they're telling them procurement's getting in our way. The model of tomorrow then would be procurement enabled us to hit better performance results. They helped us run the business better. And then on the other side, procurement, instead of reporting up monopoly money, is sending money back to the CFO, which is making contributions to EBIT. I think these two things will then, it's not about convincing the C-suite that we're a profit center. It's about the C-suite telling us, you guys are a profit center. You're a source of enterprise advantage. And once that happens, and the C-suite has a very simple way of looking at the company. You're either a revenue generator or you're not. You're either a profit generator or you're not. And when you're viewed as not, then you're in the back office. Then your resources are minimized. Then you're the first ones to get hit during a layoff. Then you have nothing invested in training and so forth, and the functional languages. So anyways, those are some of my
So
thoughts on.
does that stand true when it comes to cost cutting as well? So in a time of cost cutting, how can procurement defend itself or tackle the perception of being that cost center? Or is that a different perspective?
No, I think it just goes back to exactly what I said. If, you know, there's this story of the person who drives out to the middle of the desert, doesn't take any extra gas with them, doesn't take any water, doesn't take any food. And then once they're there, they start seeking a solution. So it's not really about how do you solve the solution when you're there. It's how do you prevent that from manifesting? So by the time the layoffs are happening, it's too late to try and have this conversation about, no, really, we add value. I promise you we add value. It's too late. That's the wrong time. It took us years to get in this situation. It's going to take us years to undo it. And so what has to happen is those things I mentioned. One of the
Yeah.
best companies I ever, I've been inside. I've worked with almost half of the Fortune 100 and then all sorts of Fortune 500 companies. And there's one very large European auto manufacturer that you know quite well, that I worked with. And they did something very smart. They had procurement and engineering reporting to the same person. And by doing that, these two organizations, and they had a set of shared performance metrics. These two organizations then collaboratively produced results that engineering could have never done on their own. And so they started standardizing things like standardizing certain headlights, standardizing steering wheels, standardizing the silos within this German company stopped acting separately. And they started driving all sorts of strategies that did not negatively impact the final consumer, but dramatically reduce costs and improve performance across the various product lines. And so this is how we have to start thinking. And if we start thinking this way, then by the time it comes for our layoffs, procurement will be, they may get layoffs, but they're going to get layoffs like a profit generator would and not like a cost generator would. And so that's where we have to focus, not on how do we negotiate once layoffs are happening. At that point, you're in the middle of the desert with no gas and no water, and it's a terrible time to have the discussion.
Right. And something you said about reporting lines before as well being really odd for procurement made me think of in our literature review that we did, we realized procurement just seems to work in these silos. And the way it's just been set up across companies leads to it just being its own manager, not having any alignment with overall organizational strategy or things like that as well. So how do you think companies can achieve that sort of convergence between procurement and supply chain planning wise, or, just tackle these silos that emerge?
So the first thing you have to really understand is, let's talk about academics for a second. No, there's very few universities that are teaching procurement. And if you go a little bit further back, nobody was. And so you have companies essentially filled with people who had zero exposure. Take me for example. I have a bachelor's degree in business and I have a master's degree in business from good institutions. And not only did I not take a class on procurement or read a book on procurement or a chapter or a page, I did not hear the word procurement in 7 years of university studies. I did not hear it. And so you have companies that are filled with people that came in with completely zero understanding of procurement, completely zero. And that is a huge contributing factor to this lack of understanding. And then on top of that, this kind of sense that this kind of sense that procurement is telling us about all this value that they're delivering, but at the end of the day, none of it is tangible. None of it is tangible because most especially the cost savings, it's completely intangible. And so it results in this situation where sometimes you have a CPO that's reporting directly to, for instance, the COO, and then after a while, the CEO says, I just don't understand this, or I don't want to be distracted by this. And then they end up putting it under someplace else. And, it's the typical places I had already mentioned: accounting, finance, legal, manufacturing, operations, someplace strange. And then very frequently, they put it under somebody that then none of them understand procurement really well. And if they put it under it's one of the business units, like under manufacturing or under operations, well, that's essentially the customer. And now you have yourself reporting to the internal customer, which creates its own set of problems, because they might tell you, cost savings is not our priority. Our priority is getting product out the door and do it quickly. And so suddenly your allegiance to the board of directors becomes subverted in a way by the people who are managing you, because they have a varying set of interests. So you talked about the convergence of procurement and supply chain management and silos. At the end of the day, every organization inside the company is siloed. There's kind of no getting away from that, except maybe HR, some of these that span across. But for the most part, most groups are siloed. Procurement and supply chain management are they're often becoming part of the same organization. They usually are, actually. So if they're siloed together. The supply chain function, I've never met a supply chain manager who's doing supply chain management. The supply chain managers are usually doing logistics, and they're doing logistics usually just between them and one supply chain link. A supply chain manager, to me, is somebody who's collaborating with a council of people from the various supply chain links and looking at supply chain metrics and making decisions for the supply chain for the good of the supply chain. I don't know anybody who's doing that. So anyways, I'm not sure I answered your question. If I didn't, perhaps you can clarify it some.
No, that's a really interesting perspective for us as well, because a lot of what we've heard so far is silos need to break down, but nobody really talks about why there are silos to begin with and why they might continue to be, they're going
I can
towards.
answer that question. The reason the silos are there with procurement is because of the history of procurement. We started out as expediters. It was a handoff function. The business unit decided what they wanted, and they gave it to procurement to expedite it. The only value procurement brought at that point, and at that point, you could be a high school dropout and do procurement. So the only value procurement brought was the ability to do exactly what they were told very, very fast. And so the function started out as a handoff with no overlap by design. And so the function started as a silo. And then the business unit doesn't, procurement wants to achieve the lowest total cost, which means they want to keep the supplier options open and the negotiation options open and so forth. But the business unit doesn't like that. They want to be able to choose their suppliers. They want to be able to say, I don't care about your procurement policies and procedures. I know what I want. This is what I want. This is who I want it from. And I know when I want it, which is yesterday, because I'm already late. And so as a consequence of that, they tend to get procurement engaged later and later to pre-cook the process as much as possible, to try and bake it as much as they can. And that happens as a consequence of not seeing the value of procurement engaging, because they view procurement as being very narrowly focused on, not understanding the business, not understanding the business drivers, and trying to make short-sighted decisions to claim more cost savings to report up, to the C-suite. And it's not the business unit's fault, and it's not procurement's fault exclusively. It's both of their faults. It's procurement's fault for being too narrowly focused, and it's the business unit's fault for not allowing the earlier engagement of procurement. But I blame procurement more than the business unit. Unlike most people in my profession, we've misused the early engagement opportunity. We have allegiance to procurement policy and procedures instead of allegiance to business unit performance. And the reason we exist is to enable business unit performance at the lowest total cost, not to achieve procurement policies and procedures. And so we're the worst salespeople in the entire company. And we instead of coming in there and discussing how we're going to make their life better, we go in there and we focus on how we're going to make, comply with our policies and procedures. And nobody wants to hear that, and if I was in the business unit, I wouldn't engage them early either if they came in with that kind of sales pitch. So I mostly blame procurement for allowing these silos to be created. We have not yet focused enough on having allegiance to the business unit performance criteria and making the business unit successful. And once we start engaging with business units with that as the primary goal, then they'll see that we're there with their best interests in mind instead of with our best interests in mind. And until such time, they'll never engage us early, and the silos will only continue to become more siloed, I guess.
Do you see a way forward for procurement to change the way it functions in terms of breaking down this silo a little bit?
There
Is
needs to
that
be joint reporting relationships. We need to have convergent processes and convergent reporting relationships very early in the design cycle, because all the problems manifest very early. By the time procurement gets involved, most of the problems are already hard-coded. And then all we can do is flawless execution to an ill-conceived demand. And so we need to do what that European auto manufacturer did, which is we need to have more and more instances of engineering, research and development, and these kind of early engagement groups having procurement as one of their sister organizations and reporting to the same people. It could be two solid lines. It could be procurement has a solid line to procurement and a solid line, not a dotted line, a solid line to the engineering director, or maybe not engineering director, to whomever engineering reports to, which could be more of an operations person. But there has to be, and perhaps they have the same, there has to be something where there's a forcing function that says you guys have to play together as a part of your day job. And you will have, and then the other part of that is there needs to be a set of shared performance metrics. So engineering must be responsible for engineering metrics and procurement metrics, and procurement needs to be responsible for procurement metrics and engineering metrics. And if the reviews start getting written on that, and if their promotions start being given based on these criteria, then magic happens. And that can happen in the course of 1 year. It doesn't take years and years to undo. You'll start seeing results in year one. So that's the way out, and companies aren't seeing this right now.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Omid. Shifting gears a little bit here, the other thing we really wanted to hear from you about was how technology is playing a role within the procurement function.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you seeing as the most useful digital technologies for enhancing procurement? Um, and which procurement areas are these most useful for? For example, our survey says user experience, efficiency, risk reduction. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's first of all, technology is changing so fast. So there's a few different areas. Pretty much every large company is doing procure to pay. And so the idea with that is that procurement never gets involved to begin with. That the end users have an Amazon-like catalog that they can go to. They can make purchases from it. And then what purchases they make are already under contract. It's already negotiated. No human being gets involved from procurement. And it's already the best desired outcome from a procurement perspective. So I'm going to assume that as a baseline already exists. I think some of the next fields that are really present opportunity, one has to be, I guess it would be, I would say three things. I would say XML standardization, artificial intelligence, and robotics. So the XML standardization is a supply chain thing, because today, let's say you had assembled a supply chain of suppliers that exclusively used the same ERP. Okay, they all had the same ERP. I promise you, no two companies in that supply chain could have their systems connect and talk to each other. And the reason is because we all have different XML standards. And so we need to have the XML standardization needs to get to a point whereby you can plug and play, although I'm not a big fan of just, changing over suppliers. But the idea is you should be able to create a supply chain like Legos, and then all of their systems can communicate once you give the access rights. That, to my knowledge, unless something's changed, that requires XML standardization. So that's the first thing. The second thing is robotics. So there's a lot of predictive analytics and automation and things like this where we can have robots come in and take over some of these sort of intelligent robots come in and take over these activities, particularly in the indirect space, meaning the space where things that do not end up in the final product, because direct materials, capital equipment tends not to have a lot of suppliers. Indirect materials and services tends to have millions. And that's the space where robotics and automation can make a huge difference. And then the third category is artificial intelligence. And, procurement spends a lot of its time responding to questions and putting out small fires and, things that are the non-trivial many overwhelm procurement every single day. And if we could have artificial intelligence, today you go to a chatbot. In fact, I was just using one today, and if I could, I would have suffocated it. I gave it this long statement of what I wanted, and it's what the problem was, and then its response was, "What do you need?" This is obviously an unintelligent chatbot. It completely failed to understand what I said. And then it said, "What do you need?" And it gave me 4 options that were completely unrelated to what I was talking about. It was an unintelligent bot. But with artificial intelligence and with this chat GPT that just came out, that I think history will look back and say this was a gigantic inflection point in technology history, actually. I think that capability could do some incredible things. For instance, a supplier sends you a contract. We could have an artificial intelligence capability where it goes through and already identifies all the issues, all the recommendations, all the changes. It could completely resolve internal customer problems for them. The artificial intelligence could go out there and identify sources, could do market analysis, there's just no end. And then I should have said four. The fourth one would be blockchain. And I think blockchain has a lot of opportunity in the supply chain for really driving. It's used for so far kind of for financial accounting ledgers between companies and so forth. It could not only be used for that, but it could be used for traceability, which is becoming more and more important. It doesn't have to be just food that makes people sick and needs traceability. It could be anything. It could be paint. It could be children's toys. It could be dog food. It could be, it could be almost anything that it could be, a high seat for a child that falls. And everything has to be traceable these days. And the blockchain capability could provide tremendous, and does provide, I think, for instance, if I'm not wrong, Tyson Chicken is using it for food traceability. And I'm sure I think Walmart might be using it. So I think the fourth one is blockchain, and for non-traditional uses, for not only financial, but also for traceability and perhaps other sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Those are some of the trends that we were also seeing, but that's really good to know that that's what's been, helpful and groundbreaking in your experience as well. Um, the other sort of big question is, what is really driving this digital transformation within procurement, and what are the areas in which this is taking place for procurement? Our survey said it's spend analytics, user experience, and category management. Does that resonate with you?
That's kind of a tough one, because I've always sort of felt, when you're a cost center, you don't get your own systems. The enterprise gets their systems, and then they tell you to use them. So let's start with that premise. And then what we try and do typically, and then the IT organization doesn't like new systems being added into the enterprise. They want to minimize the number of systems. They're trying to get rid of thousands and thousands of, of boutique systems inside the company. So we're typically talking about, one of two things: either using a capability that is an option within an ERP, or we're talking about buying a bolt-on capability where it's a third-party product, but then you're bolting it on to your ERP system. And then you can modify the third-party product and do whatever you want without modifying the ERP itself. So where are some of the areas we're seeing things? We already have the procure to pay function. That's the biggest one. Then we're seeing like electronic RFPs, electronic RFQs, electronic contract, collaborative capability, supplier management tools, reverse auction capability. I may be missing more. Was your question more categorical in terms of where the areas that we're seeing improvement, or?
What is driving improvement? So what are the areas which are hot for the C-suite or procurement leaders to actually enable tech transformation in some way?
Yeah,
So for example, user experience has been the top choice for many.
User experience, what else?
Spend analytics and category management.
Yeah, both of those are gigantic, actually. I tend to agree with those. User experience, because you won't be able to get adoption. Nothing in procurement, all the other functions inside the company, from HR, finance, accounting, payroll, all these other divisions, they can send out emails saying, starting Monday, this is the new tool you're going to use for expense reports. Starting Monday, this is how you're going to do this for HR. Starting Monday, and nobody can debate those things. But if procurement tries to send something out saying, starting Monday, this is how you're going to do something, then World War III is going to start. So procurement has to do everything with influence. We're not in a position to make any mandates. So as a consequence of that, user experience is extremely important because people will only engage and use procurement and procurement tools if they want to, not because they have to. So user experience is, and also if they don't like the experience, then they'll go to a human being in procurement. So I agree with that. Category and commodity management is quite right. Not so much from how to drive those strategies internally, I think, but rather I think it's an external thing, which is our ability, our processes for market data gathering are extremely antiquated and also full of holes. So, an end user comes to procurement with some product they haven't seen before, and they say, I want to get it from this supplier. The process of procurement going out there and trying to find out who else sells this widget and where else it might be and, what that marketplace looks like and who are the suppliers and so forth is as painful as you can possibly imagine. And that process of understanding market data, market movements, market prices, costs and cost drivers in the marketplace, trends and forecasts, all this, that is the most manual process maybe in all of procurement. And it's also the most error prone. It's the most difficult. And so that from a category and commodity management perspective is really, really needed. And then what was the last one you said?
So it was
Spend
spend
analytics.
analytics
Yes.
and category management.
Analytics is huge, and I agree with those categories. I'm at a loss for anything further than those. From a spend analytics, that's extremely important for a few reasons. One is, as the company spends money, it's not categorized very well. So, for instance, if you wanted to find out how much money, let's just say you wanted to know how much money is spent on office chairs, okay, just office chairs. It'd probably take you 3 weeks to figure out. I don't know. You'd have to call. I'll tell you how you would do it. You would have to find out who are all the companies you're buying office equipment from. Then you'd have to call all those companies and ask them, of all the purchases we made, how many of them were for office chairs? And that's how you'd have to get that data, because when we purchase things, it's not coded in such a way inside the system to create traceability and trackability. It's kind of like your groceries. If I was to ask you how much money did you spend on carrots last year, you have no system. You might have every receipt for every grocery shopping you did, yet you have no system to tell me how much you spend on carrots or on meat or on milk or anything else. And or if I was to say, from whom did you buy meat from last year? You have no system to tell me that answer. And our procurement systems are the exact same way. So you want to have this procurement cube capability, which is you want to know, what are we buying, from whom are we buying it, and who is generating the demand internally. Those three things need to be able to be assessed simultaneously for anything inside the company. It's an expenditure cube. And that capability is completely lacking. Now, we have that capability in terms of who are we buying office supplies from, how much office supplies are we buying, and who are all the different people who ask for office supplies. But that's not very valuable at that level, and it needs to get, we need to have much more slice and dice capability. So from that perspective, it's completely lacking. We need to be able to have, let me just say succinctly, we need spends, we need robust, precise, and real-time spends cube analysis capability for what are we buying, for simultaneous analysis of what are we buying, who are we buying it from, and who's doing the buying. Those three things. That's lacking. And then being able to step back and extract metadata about these things in terms of, all right, how much are each of the suppliers getting, doing Pareto analysis, understanding, where the expenditures are going and slicing and dicing them in different ways. And if a company goes today and says, oh, it looks like we're doing a lot of spending with IBM. Let's see how much we're spending with IBM. Do you know what's going to come up in the report? It's going to show IBM, I.B.M, IBM Inc., IBM Chicago, I.B.M Chicago, IBM Inc. without a dot, whereas the other one was with a dot. Because a human being is entering the supplier name, they quickly look for it when they get a requisition. If they don't see it, they add it, not recognizing that it was already there, just spelled differently or whatever. And so then you could have hundreds of entries for the same supplier. And so it's not even easy to gather supplier data. Today, if you want to find out how much you're spending with the supplier, do you know how you do it? You call the supplier and ask them, because they have better data than we do on our own expenditures. So yes, expenditure analysis in these ways needs to become a lot better.
Sounds like just visibility across the supply chain is a big theme for improving procurement at this point. Well, I'm conscious that we're at time, and thank you so much for
Okay.
spending all this time with us. Just two quick questions here. I feel like as we consolidate, all your insights on this and move forward with the papers, we might come across more questions. Would you be comfortable if we followed up with you via email for some follow-ups?
Yes, that's quite fine.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And then the second was from SAP. They'd love to pull up some of your quotes for use for a promotion of their assets. And for that, they'd like your permission through a release form. Would you be comfortable with that?
Yes, that's fine.
Excellent. I'll share those along once we're sharing the quotes with you for your approval or
Yes.
adjustment somewhere. And great, I'll be in touch with any other questions. Well, thank you so much again, Omid. Really appreciate this.